Hello, and welcome to our quiet corner of the night. It is time to let the day dissolve, to soften the edges of your thoughts and allow yourself to drift. Tonight's story is a gentle whisper, a tale of quiet magic and rediscovery. It is a story to accompany you on your journey towards rest. If you find comfort in these words, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, so you may always have a soft place to land when the world feels too loud. Now, find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and let us travel together to a place where a bell rings. Not for the time of day, but for the time of the heart. The city had a sound, a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrated through the soles of Clara's shoes and into her very bones. It was the sound of ambition, of millions of lives running parallel but never touching, of deadlines and traffic and the incessant chime of digital notifications. For 7 years, this sound had been the soundtrack to her life. She had learned to sleep through it, to work through it, to exist within its unyielding embrace. She had believed this hum was the sound of success. Now, as the train pulled away from the sprawling metropolis, the silence that gradually replaced it felt vast and unnerving. Like a missing limb, Clara leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the monolithic towers of glass and steel recede, replaced by a patchwork of green and gold fields under a sky that seemed impossibly wide and blue. She was returning to Lumen, the town she had left with such determined haste after university. It was not a homecoming she had chosen. A letter, written in the spidery, elegant script of a lawyer, had informed her of her grandmother's passing and her new responsibility, an old house full of memories that needed to be sorted, packed, and sold. The task felt monumental, a heavy anchor pulling her back to a past she had meticulously curated out of her present. Her life in the city was a masterpiece of efficiency. Her apartment was minimalist, her schedule was optimized, and her emotions were neatly filed away. She was a senior project manager at a prestigious marketing firm, a title that felt both important and utterly meaningless. Her days were a blur of conference calls, spreadsheets, and PowerPoints, all rendered in shades of corporate blue and gray. She was good at it, very good, but lately, a persistent hollowness had begun to echo within her, a quiet ache that no promotion or bonus could soothe. The train slowed, its gentle rocking a stark contrast to the jolting immediacy of the subway she rode every day. The station at Lumen was exactly as she remembered, a small, wooden structure with a sloping green roof and pots of cheerful geraniums lining the platform. The air that greeted her as she stepped off the train was different. It smelled of damp earth, of pine needles, and of the sweet, subtle perfume of distant wood smoke. It was the smell of her childhood, and it caught in her throat, an unexpected wave of nostalgia that she quickly suppressed. There was no time for sentimentality. This was a project, like any other, with a clear objective and a deadline. She would be efficient, she would be professional, she would dismantle her past and return to her real life as quickly as possible. Her grandmother's house stood at the end of a winding lane. A 2-story cottage half swallowed by an unruly garden of roses and lavender. The paint was peeling, and a fine layer of dust coated the windows. But it stood with a quiet dignity, a silent testament to the long, peaceful life lived within its walls. As she fitted the old brass key into the lock, a sound drifted on the breeze, so faint she almost missed it. It was a single, melodic chime, like a small, clear bell. It was a beautiful, pure note that seemed to hang in the air for a moment before dissolving into the chirping of crickets. She paused, listening, but there was only the wind sighing through the leaves of the ancient oak tree in the yard. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as a trick of the wind, her mind already moving on to the logistics of the task ahead. Stepping into her grandmother's house was like stepping into a preserved moment in time. The air inside was still and cool, thick with the scent of dried herbs, beeswax, and old paper. A fine layer of dust motes danced in the shafts of late afternoon sun slanting through the living room window. illuminating a world that had not changed in over a decade. The furniture was the same, the overstuffed armchair with its floral pattern worn smooth, the heavy oak table scarred with the history of countless meals and projects, the grandfather clock standing silent in the corner, its hands frozen at 3:15. It felt less like a house and more like a vessel, filled to the brim with the quiet echoes of a life well lived. Clara set down her sleek, modern suitcase by the door, and it looked jarringly out of place, an artifact from another world. Her first night was a study in sensory dislocation. The silence was the most profound difference. In her city apartment, the world never truly slept. There was always the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a late-night train, the hum of the building's ventilation system. Here, the silence was an active presence, broken only by the gentle creaking of the old house settling and the whisper of the wind outside. She lay in her grandmother's bed, the sheets smelling faintly of lavender and cedar, and found sleep elusive. Her mind, so accustomed to the constant barrage of stimuli, raced in the quiet, replaying work emails and project timelines. It was in this state, hovering between exhaustion and wakefulness, that she heard it again. The chime. It was clearer this time. A single, resonant note that seemed to come from no specific direction. It wasn't the sound of a wind chime, which would be a cascade of notes, nor was it the heavy toll of a church bell. This was something more personal, more intimate. It sounded impossibly close and infinitely far away all at once. The note was pure and unwavering, imbued with a strange, sweet melancholy that resonated deep within her chest. She sat up in bed, her heart beating a little faster, and listened intently, but the sound was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving behind only the profound, deep silence of the countryside night. The next morning, she began her work, armed with cardboard boxes, packing tape, and a ruthless sense of purpose. She started in the study. Her grandmother had been a collector of stories, both in books and in objects. The room was a labyrinth of towering bookshelves, cluttered desks, and cabinets filled with curiosities, seashells, interesting stones, pressed flowers, and bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. Clara's plan was simple: sort everything into 3 categories: keep, donate, and discard. The keep pile was to be minimal, restricted to essential documents and a few small mementos. Yet, as she began to sift through the layers of the past, her carefully constructed efficiency began to falter. She found a copy of her favorite childhood book, its cover soft with wear, and on the inside page, her grandmother's inscription, "For my little songbird, may you always find the magic." She ran her thumb over the faded ink, a forgotten warmth spreading through her. A few minutes later, tucked inside a heavy dictionary, she found a charcoal sketch she had made when she was 16. It was a portrait of the old oak tree in the yard, its branches rendered with a surprising level of skill and passion. She stared at the drawing, a ghost of the girl who had spent hours lost in the simple joy of creation. It felt like looking at a stranger, as she held the drawing, lost in a memory she hadn't accessed in years. The bell chimed again, closer and more distinct than ever before. It was a clear, silver note that seemed to affirm the memory, to call out to the girl who had held that charcoal stick. This time, she was certain, it wasn't the wind. The process of emptying the house became a slow, unintentional excavation of her own life. Each object she touched seemed to unlock a dormant memory, a forgotten piece of herself. There was the set of watercolor paints, the cakes of color cracked and dry. That reminded her of rainy afternoons spent at the kitchen table, her grandmother showing her how to blend cerulean blue with lemon yellow to create the perfect shade of green for grass. There was the small, wooden flute she had played with more enthusiasm than skill, the memory of its breathy, imperfect notes filling the quiet house. There was a box of her old journals, their pages filled with the dramatic, Heartfelt prose of a teenager who felt everything with a seismic intensity. She read a few pages, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and a strange sort of envy for the girl who was so unafraid to feel, to dream, to be unabashedly herself. This younger Clara, the one who lived in these pages and objects, was a stranger. She painted, she wrote poetry, she climbed trees, she believed in a quiet, everyday sort of magic. The Clara who now stood in the dusty sunlight of the study was a creature of logic and logistics. She managed budgets, mitigated risks, and communicated in corporate speak. Her creativity was channeled into crafting compelling marketing narratives for products she didn't care about. Her passions were relegated to a personal development section on her annual performance review. When had the switch happened? She couldn't pinpoint a single moment. It had been a gradual erosion, a slow trade-off of passion for practicality, of wonder for security. She had convinced herself it was simply called growing up, but as she stood there, surrounded by the evidence of a richer, more vibrant self, it felt more like a great forgetting. The bell continued to ring, its appearances becoming more frequent and its connection to her past more obvious. It never chimed when she was methodically taping up a box of old kitchenware or sorting through utility bills. It remained silent during her dutiful calls to the estate lawyer and the real estate agent. But it would sound, soft and clear, when she found a photograph of herself laughing, face smeared with mud, after a summer rainstorm. It peeled gently when she unearthed a pressed four-leaf clover tucked into a book of poetry. It rang with a startling clarity when she discovered a half-finished canvas behind an old wardrobe. A landscape of the Lumen Valley she had abandoned mid-brushstroke. The bell was becoming a punctuation mark for her memories, a gentle summons from a life she had left behind. Its sound wasn't startling or frightening, it was deeply, inexplicably comforting. It was like the voice of an old friend, reminding her of something important she had almost lost. It was the sound of a door creaking open, a door she hadn't even realized was closed. The more she remembered, the more she felt the hollowness within her being filled, not with noise or distraction, but with the quiet, resonant echo of that beautiful, mysterious bell. She started to wonder if she was the only one who could hear it. After 3 days immersed in the dusty silence of the house, Clara felt an overwhelming need for fresh air and human voices. She decided to walk into the town of Lumen, a journey she had made thousands of times as a child but not once in the last 7 years. The town was nestled in a gentle valley, cradled by rolling hills that were now a vibrant tapestry of late summer greens and golds. The air was clean and carried the scent of freshly cut grass from a nearby meadow. The sky, unburdened by the haze of pollution, was a deep and piercing blue. As she walked, she noticed the small details that her city-sharpened senses had learned to filter out. She saw the intricate web of a spider, glistening with dew on a fence post. She heard the distinct songs of different birds in the canopy of trees overhead. She felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, a gentle, nurturing heat that was nothing like the oppressive, reflected glare of city concrete. Lumen itself was a picture of timeless tranquility. The main street was lined with buildings made of warm, local stone, their windowsills overflowing with flowers. There was the bakery, a plume of fragrant steam billowing from its chimney, the scent of baking bread and cinnamon teasing the air. There was the old bookshop, its windows filled not with bestsellers but with curated collections of local history and poetry. There was the post office, which also served as the general store, a hub of quiet gossip and community news. Nothing seemed to have changed, yet everything felt different because she had once been a part of this slow, deliberate rhythm. Now, she felt like a tourist, an observer looking in on a life that was no longer hers. Her brisk, purposeful walk, a habit honed on crowded city pavements, felt aggressive and out of place here, where people ambled and paused to chat. She stopped by the town square, A small green space with a weathered stone fountain at its center. Children were laughing as they chased pigeons. And on a bench under a large maple tree, two elderly men were engrossed in a game of chess. No one was rushing. No one was staring at a phone. The only sounds were the splash of the fountain, the murmur of conversation, and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was a world away from the frantic, head-down pace of her life. She sat on an empty bench, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. In the city, she was important. She had a title, a team, a packed schedule that proved her worth. Here, she was just a woman on a bench, a footnote in the town's daily life. And as this thought settled, a new one followed, unbidden and unsettling. Which life was more real? The one where she was constantly busy but felt empty? Or this one, where time seemed to expand and the world felt rich with simple, quiet beauty? As she pondered this, a familiar sound reached her ears. A single, pure chime. It seemed to rise from the very heart of the square, a note of perfect peace that cut through the gentle hum of the town. She looked around, searching for its source, a bell tower, a shop sign, but saw nothing. The sound was just there, a secret shared only with her. The bell was no longer a passing curiosity, it had become a gentle obsession. Clara's organized mind, trained to identify problems and seek solutions, could not let the mystery rest. The sound was real, she was sure of it, and it had to have a source. She decided to conduct a small, informal investigation, weaving it into her errands in town. Her first stop was the bakery, where Mrs. Gable, a woman whose face was as warm and comforting as the bread she sold, had been a fixture since Clara's childhood. After buying a loaf of crusty sourdough, Clara broached the subject casually. "It's a beautiful day," she began. "So quiet, though. I keep hearing a lovely bell. A single chime, very clear. Is there a new clock in the square? Perhaps?" Mrs. Gable dusted flour from her apron, her brow furrowed in thought. "A bell, dear? No, not that I can think of. The church bells only ring on Sunday mornings. And that's a whole peal. Not a single chime. Must be the wind playing tricks on you. It likes to sing around these old buildings." Slightly discouraged but undeterred, Clara moved on to the bookshop. Mr. Abernathy, the proprietor, was a man who seemed to be made of paper and tweed. He sat behind a fortress of books, peering over a pair of spectacles. He was the town's unofficial historian and a collector of arcane knowledge. Surely, he would know. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, after browsing the shelves for a polite amount of time, "I have a strange question. I've been hearing a bell since I arrived. It's a very pure, melodic sound, just one note at a time. It's not the church." Mr. Abernathy looked up, his eyes twinkling with interest. He loved a good puzzle. "A single chime," he mused, stroking his chin. "How fascinating. Lumen has no public bells of that nature. We have the school bell, but that's a harsh clang. We have the firehouse bell, but that's an alarm. And the church, as you say, no, a single, melodic chime. It's not a sound I'm familiar with. Are you certain you're not misremembering the sound of a distant cowbell from the farms in the hills?" She left the bookshop with a growing sense of frustration and a sliver of doubt. Was it possible they were right? Was it just the wind, or her tired mind playing tricks on her? Was this what happened when you removed the constant hum of the city? Your brain simply invented new sounds to fill the void. She wandered back towards her grandmother's house, her mission a failure. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to her work, to a difficult client and an impending project deadline. Her shoulders tensed, her jaw tightened, and her mind began to spin with strategies and contingency plans. The familiar anxiety was a tight knot in her stomach, and in that state of professional worry, the world around her faded. The birdsong, the scent of pine, the warmth of the sun, it all receded, replaced by the gray landscape of her corporate responsibilities. For the rest of the walk home, The world was silent. The bell did not ring. Days passed in a similar rhythm. Clara would spend her mornings sorting through the tangible pieces of her grandmother's life. And with each rediscovered treasure, the bell would chime, a gentle counterpoint to her memories. The afternoons were for errands in town or long, aimless walks through the surrounding woods, during which she tried, and failed, to locate the source of the sound. The locals were kind, but their answers were always the same: a shake of the head, a look of polite confusion. The bell, it seemed, rang only for her. This realization was both isolating and strangely intimate. It was her secret, her private mystery. One afternoon, while exploring a narrow, cobbled side street she had rarely walked down as a child, she stumbled upon a shop she had never noticed before. The sign hanging from a wrought iron bracket was beautifully carved from a single piece of dark wood, the cog and compass. Below the name, in smaller letters, it read, "Mender of Timepieces and Lost Things." The shop window was a fascinating clutter of objects. There were antique clocks with intricate brass pendulums, their hands all stopped at different times. There were gleaming sextants and astrolabes, tools for navigating by the stars. There were delicate music boxes, their lids closed on silent melodies. There were compasses of all shapes and sizes, their needles all pointing steadfastly north. The entire display had an air of quiet magic, as if it were a repository for things that operated on principles other than the strictly mechanical. A small, handwritten card propped against a pocket watch read, "Time is not a line, but a landscape." Intrigued, Clara pushed open the heavy wooden door. A tiny brass bell attached to the door jangled, a cheerful, mundane sound that was nothing like the one she had been hearing. The interior of the shop was even more enchanting than the window. It smelled of old wood, brass polish, and a faint, pleasant scent of chamomile tea. The air was filled with a soft, gentle ticking, a chorus of 100 different clocks, each keeping its own version of time. The sound was not chaotic but soothing, like a mechanical heartbeat. Behind a large workbench cluttered with tiny tools, magnifying glasses, and the intricate guts of a dismantled clock, sat an old man. He had a cascade of white hair, a kind, deeply wrinkled face, and eyes that were a startlingly bright blue. He was wearing a leather apron over a simple shirt and was peering through a jeweler's loupe at a minuscule gear he held in a pair of tweezers. He looked up as she entered, his blue eyes seeming to take in everything about her in a single, unhurried glance. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice as soft and steady as the ticking that filled the room. "Welcome. What has time, or the lack of it, brought you today?" Clara felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. This place, and this man, felt different. She had a feeling that if anyone in Lumen could understand her mystery, it would be him. Clara found herself at a loss for words. Her logical, project manager mind had no script for this situation. How did one ask a stranger if he knew about a magical bell that only she could hear? She decided on a more grounded approach. "I was just admiring your shop," she said, her voice sounding a little too formal in the cozy space. "It's a beautiful collection." The man smiled, a gentle expression that crinkled the corners of his bright eyes. He removed the loupe and set down his tools. "Thank you. Each one has a story. They measure time, but they also hold it, like little treasure chests of moments." He gestured to a stool opposite his workbench. "My name is Elias. Please, have a seat." Clara sat, feeling like a client in a consultation, though she had nothing to be fixed. "I'm Clara," she said. "I'm here for a little while, sorting out my grandmother's house. Eleanor Vance." Elias's smile deepened. "Ah, Eleanor, a wonderful woman." She understood that the most valuable things are not the newest. "She brought me a cuckoo clock once that hadn't sung in 30 years. She didn't mind that it couldn't tell the time. She just missed its song." This small anecdote about her grandmother, a detail she'd never known, resonated with her. It was a perfect encapsulation of the woman who had valued magic over utility. Emboldened, Clara decided to take a chance. "Elias," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I've been experiencing something strange since I came back to Lumen. I keep hearing a sound. A bell. It's just a single chime. Very clear and melodic. I've asked around, but no one else seems to hear it or know what it is." Elias did not look at her as if she were mad. He did not dismiss her or offer a rational explanation. Instead, he simply nodded, his gaze thoughtful. He picked up a small, silver pocket watch from his bench, its case worn smooth with age. "Some sounds are not meant for all ears," he said softly, his fingers tracing the engraving on the watch. "Some are tuned to a specific frequency. Tell me, Clara, when do you hear this bell?" The question caught her off guard. She had been focused on the what and where, not the when. She thought back over the past week. "I hear it when I remember things," she said, the realization dawning on her as she spoke the words aloud. "When I find an old drawing, or a book from my childhood. I hear it when I think about who I used to be." Elias nodded again, a knowing look in his eyes. He didn't offer an explanation. Instead, he gestured to a dusty, beautifully crafted music box she had brought in from her grandmother's collection. "Hoping it could be repaired. Like this music box," he said. "The melody is still inside. The mechanism is just stuck. It has forgotten how to play its own song. Perhaps, if you were to help it remember, you might understand your bell a little better." He opened a drawer and handed her a set of delicate tools. "The work is patient. It requires you to listen very closely. Not just with your ears, but with your hands, with your heart." Clara took the music box home, along with the small, specialized tools Elias had lent her. It was an exquisite object, crafted from a dark, polished wood with a mother-of-pearl inlay of a nightingale perched on a branch. Her grandmother had loved it, but it had been silent for as long as Clara could remember. The winding key turned, but the mechanism inside only produced a tired, metallic groan. Following Elias's advice, she cleared a space on the old oak table in the living room and began her delicate work. At first, it was frustrating. The inner workings of the music box were a miniature world of gears, springs, and a large, brass cylinder covered in tiny pins. It was a complex system where every single piece had a purpose. Her first instinct was to force a part that was stuck, to apply the same kind of brute force determination she used to push through difficult projects at work. But that only made it worse. She remembered Elias's words, "The work is patient." She took a deep breath, pushing aside her ingrained habit of rushing towards a solution. She began to simply observe. She used a magnifying glass to trace the path of the gears, to see how the pins on the cylinder were meant to strike the teeth of the metal comb to produce the notes. She learned to touch the components with a feather-light touch, nudging them gently, cleaning away decades of dust and grime with a soft brush. The process became a form of meditation. The rest of the world fell away. There were no emails to answer, no meetings to prepare for. There was only the quiet, focused task at hand. The intricate, logical beauty of the mechanism appealed to her project manager mind. But the work required something more, an intuitive feel, a sense of empathy for this small, broken thing. Hours melted into an afternoon, and the afternoon softened into evening. She worked by the light of a single lamp, the house wrapped in a profound and comforting silence. As she worked, memories of her grandmother surfaced. Unbidden, she remembered her grandmother sitting at this very table, patiently mending a torn dress or repotting a delicate orchid. She had never understood that kind of patience as a child, but now she felt it in her own hands. She found the source of the problem. A tiny gear had slipped its axle, jamming the entire sequence. With the precision of a surgeon, using 2 pairs of fine-tipped tweezers, she coaxed it back into place. There was a soft, satisfying click as it settled. Holding her breath, she carefully turned the winding key. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a single, hesitant note emerged, clear and sweet. It was followed by another, and another, until a fragile, beautiful melody filled the room. It was a simple, haunting tune, a lullaby her grandmother used to hum. As the forgotten song played, Clara felt tears well in her eyes. And in that moment, mingling with the music, the bell rang. It was not a single chime this time, but a gentle, resonant peal, as if it were celebrating the return of the music. It was a sound of restoration, of something lost being found again. The successful mending of the music box shifted something within Clara. The task had slowed her down, forced her to find a different kind of focus, one that was gentle and receptive rather than aggressive and demanding. She began to approach the sorting of her grandmother's house with this newfound patience. She was no longer just clearing out rooms, she was listening to the stories they held. This new approach led her to a small, locked wooden chest in the back of a linen closet. A chest she had overlooked in her initial, efficient sweep. The key was, predictably, tucked away in a small, porcelain dish on her grandmother's bedside table. Inside the chest, she didn't find valuables or legal documents. She found letters, hundreds of them, tied in bundles with silk ribbons, organized by year. There were letters her grandfather had written to her grandmother during his time away in the service, filled with declarations of love and longing. There were letters from her grandmother's sister, detailing the small joys and sorrows of a life lived 1,000 miles away. And then, she found a bundle of letters that her grandmother had never sent. They were all addressed to Clara. She had written one every year on Clara's birthday, from the day she left for the city until the year before her passing. Clara sat on the floor of the hallway, the scent of old paper and dried lavender rising from the chest, and began to read. The letters were not filled with advice or admonishments. They were simple, loving observations. "My dearest Clara," the first one began, "today you are 22. I saw a flock of swallows today, swooping over the valley, and it reminded me of the way you used to run through the fields. So full of life and purpose. I hope you are finding your own sky to fly in." She read on, letter after letter, a chronicle of her own life seen through her grandmother's loving eyes. Her grandmother wrote about the changing seasons in Lumen, about a new book she had read, about a particularly beautiful sunset, and in every letter, there was a gentle thread of connection to the person Clara had been. "You always loved the smell of rain on dry earth," one letter said. "I hope you still find moments to stand by a window and just breathe it in." Another read, "I was weeding the garden today and found the small stone turtle you painted for me when you were 8. It still makes me smile. I hope you are still making things that make people smile, even if it's just for yourself." Clara read for hours, the words a soothing balm on a wound she hadn't known she carried. These letters were not a judgment on the life she had chosen, but a gentle reminder of the life that still existed within her. With each letter she read, with each memory of her true nature that was reawakened, the bell would chime. It was a soft, constant companion to her reading, its pure note a confirmation of the truth in her grandmother's words. It was the sound of her own heart, slowly, gently, being remembered. In the final letter she read, dated just a few months before her passing, her grandmother had written something that made Clara pause. "I went up to the attic today. My dear, it is a place of forgotten treasures. I found your old easel. It is waiting for you, just as you left it. Some things are not meant to be forgotten forever. They just need the right person to come and wake them up." The attic. In all her systematic clearing of the house, Clara had completely ignored the attic. The entrance was a small, square panel in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway, easily missed. She had no memory of ever going up there as a child. It had been a place for storing things that were too old or broken to be useful. but too sentimental to be thrown away. Finding a small stepladder in a utility closet, she positioned it under the panel. It took some effort to push the panel up, and a shower of dust and a smell of dry, ancient wood rained down on her. She pulled down the folding wooden ladder, its joints groaning in protest. With a flashlight in hand, she cautiously ascended into the darkness. The air in the attic was thick and still, hot from being trapped under the roof. The only light came from a single, grime-covered circular window at the far end of the space, which cast a weak, ethereal beam through the swirling dust motes. The attic was larger than she had expected. A long, low-ceilinged space filled with the ghosts of forgotten objects draped in white sheets. It was a silent, secret museum of her family's history. She moved slowly, her footsteps soft on the wide wooden floorboards. There were old trunks, a rocking horse from her father's childhood, stacks of old magazines, and a dressmaker's dummy that looked like a headless sentinel in the dim light. And there, in the far corner, illuminated by the single beam of light from the window, was the easel. It was just as her grandmother had described. Waiting patiently, it was a simple, sturdy wooden easel, splattered with the faint ghosts of old paint. Leaning against it was a large, flat wooden chest. Clara knelt down, her heart beating with a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. She ran her hand over the smooth, cool wood of the chest. There was a simple brass latch holding it closed. She lifted it, the sound of the click echoing in the profound silence of the attic. As she slowly raised the heavy lid, the bell chimed. It was not a sound in the air around her, but a sound that seemed to come from within the attic itself. A deep, resonant tone that made the very floorboards seem to vibrate. It was a sound of profound significance, a sound of arrival. Lifting the lid of the wooden chest was like opening a time capsule. The first thing that hit her was the smell, a rich, evocative aroma that instantly transported her back 20 years. It was the smell of linseed oil, of turpentine, and the faint, earthy scent of pigment. It was the smell of creation, of possibility, of long, happy hours spent lost in a world of her own making. The chest was her old art box, a gift from her parents on her 12th birthday. Inside, everything was neatly arranged, a testament to the care of a girl who had loved her tools. There were rows of oil paint tubes, their labels faded but the colors within still pliable and vibrant. She picked up a tube of ultramarine blue, her favorite color, and squeezed it gently. A small, perfect bead of deep, rich blue emerged. There were her brushes, their wooden handles worn smooth, their bristles stiff but still holding their shape. She remembered the specific purpose of each one: the broad, flat brush for laying down skies, the fine, pointed one for delicate details. There were jars of medium, a palette knife still caked with the brilliant turquoise of a long-ago seascape, and sticks of charcoal, black and crumbly. Tucked in a side compartment was a stack of small, prepared canvases, their white gesso surfaces clean and expectant. It was a complete world, a kingdom of color and form that she had abdicated years ago. She had told herself she didn't have time for art anymore, that it was an impractical hobby that had no place in her serious adult life. But looking at these tools, she realized it wasn't a lack of time, it was a lack of courage. She had been afraid she wasn't good enough, afraid of wasting time on something that didn't have a clear, profitable outcome, afraid of the vulnerability that came with creating something from the heart. She sat on the floor of the dusty attic, surrounded by the tools of her forgotten passion, and felt a profound sense of loss. She had traded this vibrant, sensory world for a world of digital screens and sterile meeting rooms. She had traded the joy of mixing the perfect shade of sunset orange for the satisfaction of a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. As she sat there, holding a brush in her hand, feeling the familiar weight of it, the bell rang again. This time, the sound was different. It wasn't just a single note. It was a chord, a series of harmonious notes that seemed to build and swell in the quiet air. It was a sound of encouragement, of welcome. It was not a bell that mourned a forgotten heart, but one that celebrated its imminent rediscovery. It was a call to action, a gentle, insistent summons to come home to herself. Carrying the easel and the art box down from the attic felt like a sacred act. She didn't take them to a spare room or tuck them away. She set up the easel in the very center of the living room, in the spot where the afternoon light was best. She cleaned the palette, laid out her tubes of paint, and filled a small jar with turpentine, its pungent, familiar scent filling the space. She placed a blank canvas on the easel. It stared back at her, a vast, intimidating expanse of white. For over an hour, she just sat there, looking at it. The fear she had suppressed for years came rushing back. Her hands felt clumsy, her mind blank. The effortless confidence of her 16-year-old self was gone, replaced by the harsh, critical voice of an adult who judged everything by its outcome. What was the point? It wouldn't be any good. It was a waste of expensive paint. Her inner critic was loud, but the quiet of her grandmother's house was louder. The memory of the music box, of the patient work that had brought back its song, came to her. She thought of her grandmother's letters, of the gentle, unconditional love they contained. She was not trying to create a masterpiece to be sold or judged. She was not trying to achieve a key performance indicator. She was simply trying to remember. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't think about what to paint. Instead, she thought about a feeling. She thought about the feeling of peace she had felt sitting in the town square. The warmth of the sun, the sound of the fountain. She squeezed a dollop of cerulean blue onto her palette, then a touch of viridian green, a splash of Naples yellow. She picked up the palette knife and began to mix the colors. Watching them swirl and combine, the simple, physical act was grounding. She picked up a brush, dipped it into the vibrant green she had created, and without another thought, she touched it to the canvas. The first brush stroke, it was not a hesitant dab, but a confident, sweeping line, and with that single motion, something broke free inside her. The fear dissolved, the critical voice fell silent. There was only the canvas, the color, and the movement of her hand. She was no longer thinking or planning, she was feeling. She painted for hours, completely lost in the process. Time ceased to exist. She was a child again at the kitchen table, an absorbed teenager in her room, a creator immersed in her own world. She painted the Lumen Valley, not as a photograph would see it, but as her heart remembered it. The hills a little softer, the sky a little brighter, the colors imbued with a sense of love and nostalgia. As she was applying the final touches, a streak of brilliant white to a cloud, the bell rang. It was the loudest, clearest, and most joyful it had ever been. It was not a sound she heard with her ears, but a vibration she felt in her very soul. It was a resonant, triumphant peal that filled her entire being. And in that moment, she understood everything. The bell was not in the town. It was in her. It was the sound of her own heart. Finally remembering its own song. The next day, Clara returned to the cog and compass. She carried the mended music box, which was now wrapped carefully in a soft cloth. When she entered the shop, the gentle chorus of ticking clocks felt like a familiar welcome. Elias was at his workbench, just as before, but he looked up as she entered, and a warm smile spread across his face. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Ah, Clara," he said, "the songbird has returned." She placed the music box on the counter and unwrapped it. "It works," she said, a quiet pride in her voice. "The melody is beautiful." Elias nodded, his bright blue eyes studying her face. "I never doubted it would. You have patient hands, and a listening heart." He wound the key, and the clear, sweet lullaby filled the shop, weaving its simple tune through the complex rhythms of the clocks. "I came to thank you," Clara said, "and to tell you that I understand now." About the bell, Elias simply smiled and gestured for her to take the stool again. "Tell me what you have come to understand," he prompted gently. "It's not a physical bell, is it?" she began, the words tumbling out as she pieced together the thoughts she had been having all morning. "It's me. It's a part of me. It rings when I get close to the person I was. The person I'm supposed to be. It chimed when I found my old drawings. When I read my grandmother's letters. When I finally picked up a paintbrush again. It was silent when I was being the city version of myself. All stress and schedules. It was trying to guide me home." Elias listened, his expression one of deep, serene affirmation. "Lumen is an old place, Clara," he said after she had finished. "There is a quiet magic in its hills and its water. And there is a legend. The legend says that a guardian bell was placed here long ago. Not in a tower, but in the heart of the town itself. It doesn't ring for just anyone. It rings for those who were born of this place, who have a piece of lumen in their soul. It rings when they wander too far from their own true north. When they forget the landscape of their own heart. It is a reminder, a call to find their way back." He picked up an old, beautiful compass from his desk. The needle quivered for a moment before settling, pointing steadfastly north. "Your career, your life in the city. That is a map," he said. "It is useful for getting from one place to another. But this," he tapped the glass of the compass, "this is what tells you where you are, and which way is true. The bell is your compass. Clara, you learned to hear it again. And now you have helped it ring its clearest song." Clara looked from the compass to Elias's kind face, and a profound sense of peace washed over her. The mystery was solved, but the solution wasn't a location or an object. It was a simple, beautiful truth about herself. Clara's remaining time in Lumen was different. The task of clearing the house no longer felt like a chore. It became a gentle act of stewardship, of honoring her grandmother's life and, in doing so, reclaiming her own. She worked with a newfound sense of peace and purpose. She packed away the everyday objects, the plates, the linens, the books, with care. But she also made space for a new life to enter the house. She spent every afternoon painting. She took her easel out into the wild, unruly garden and painted the riot of roses and lavender. She walked down to the creek at the edge of the woods and painted the way the sunlight dappled through the leaves onto the moving water. She wasn't painting for a gallery or for an audience. She was painting for the sheer, unadulterated joy of it. She painted to feel the sun on her back and the brush in her hand. With every canvas she filled, she felt a part of herself. A part that had been dormant and gray, burst back into vibrant color. She no longer heard the bell. She didn't need to. The feeling that the bell had pointed her towards, that quiet, centered sense of self, was now a constant presence. She had internalized its music. She realized that forgetting her heart hadn't been a single, dramatic event. It had been 1,000 tiny choices made over years, choosing a practical career over a passionate one, choosing efficiency over wonder, choosing the noise of the city over the quiet of her own soul. Coming home hadn't been about returning to a physical place, but about returning to that inner landscape Elias had spoken of. She started to think about her life in the city. Her first instinct, in the glow of her rediscovery, was to reject it completely, to sell her apartment, quit her job, and stay in Lumen forever. But as she sat on the porch one evening, watching the fireflies begin to flicker in the twilight, she knew that wasn't the answer either. The 7 years in the city had taught her things. She was organized, capable, and strong in ways she hadn't been before. The solution wasn't to erase one part of her life in favor of another, but to find a way to integrate them. She could be both the capable project manager and the passionate artist. She could live in the modern world without losing touch with the ancient, quiet magic within her. The goal was not to retreat from her life, but to bring her whole self into it. When she packed her car to leave, the sleek suitcase was joined by the old wooden easel and the chest full of paints. They no longer looked out of place together. They looked like two essential parts of a whole. The drive back to the city was the reverse of her journey to Lumen. But Clara was not the same person who had made that trip. The gray towers rising on the horizon no longer seemed oppressive. They were just buildings, a landscape, a part of her story. The low hum of the city, which she could begin to feel as she drew closer, no longer felt like a vibration of anxiety, but simply a background noise, a sound she could choose to tune out. When she walked into her minimalist apartment, it didn't feel like a sanctuary of efficiency anymore. It felt empty, but not in a hollow, lonely way. It felt like a blank canvas. It was a space waiting to be filled not just with objects, but with life, with color, with her. That evening, she didn't turn on the television or scroll through her phone. She unpacked her easel and her paints and set them up by the large window that overlooked the sprawling city. The view was a dizzying tapestry of lights and shadows, a million stories unfolding in the concrete canyons below. For years, she had looked out this window and seen only a grid, a representation of her work and her ambition. Now, she saw beauty. She saw shapes and colors in the dramatic play of light against darkness. She began to paint. She didn't need to be in Lumen to feel connected to her heart. She had learned that the quiet, the magic, the true north that Elias spoke of, was not a place you could travel to. It was a place you carried within you. The bell had been an external guide, a gentle alarm set by her own soul to wake her up when she had fallen too deeply asleep. But now she was awake. She didn't need the reminder anymore because she was living the truth it had pointed her toward. As she painted, lost in the familiar, joyful rhythm of creation, she was filled with a deep, quiet sense of peace. There was no mystical chime, no supernatural sound. There was only the soft scratch of the brush on the canvas, the distant murmur of the city, and the steady, gentle, and resilient beat of her own heart, finally playing its own beautiful, familiar song. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would never forget how to listen to it again.